Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to the World Blitz Chess Championship in 2021. So this super tournament has reached almost its end and we're now already in the round 19. But before we analyze of course what's going on now after 19 rounds, I wanted to show really a brilliant game from the round 18 between Jan-Krzysztof Duda and Daniil Dubov. This was one of the most important games of this event because Daniil Dubov and Jan-Krzysztof Duda had the opportunity to take the lead in the super event, although Levon Aronian was in the lead the whole time, but Levon Aronian unfortunately lost some games, and then of course one of these guys could really take the lead. So as I said, Jan-Krzysztof Duda versus Daniil Dubov, it was, as I said, the most important maybe match of this super prestigious tournament. So let's check out now what happened here. Jan-Krzysztof Duda played with the white piece, this Daniil Dubov here with the black pieces, and I'm really glad that this Blitz chess championship is showing really great tacticians. It exposes basically the best tacticians. I really love to see brilliant tactics, so that's why sharp attackers, fast thinkers are basically here the best players. So of course then we know Daniil Dubov is such a player, so that's why Daniil Dubov has also great chances to win this very prestigious tournament. So here in the beginning, Jan-Krzysztof Duda opened with the move e4. Daniil Dubov's response was c5 the Sicilian. We have knight to f3, and after move d6 we have c3, but this is now the so-called Alpin variation. From white perspective, we are preparing now the move d4, and then after potential c takes d4, then white has of course here the pawn central control, which means white would have two connected pawns in the center, which are controlling then this four squares on the side of the board. So here in the continuation, knight to f6 played by Dubov, attacking immediately the pawn on e4. That's why this move knight to f6 is a little bit provocative. You could maybe play the move e5 and open the center, but here Jan-Krzysztof Duda decided to play this delayed Alpin system with the move bishop to d3. He tried then to play the move bishop to c2, and then of course here then to place the pawn here on d4. The problem about the delayed Alpin or the Alpin variation is of course that you will get your pawn central control in one particular moment. It's not the point that you not make that happen, but the development is a little bit slower than in the usual Sicilian stuff. So here we can already agree that the move c3 is of course preparing the move d4, but it actually takes also the natural square for your knight. You would love of course to bring your knight then on c3, then we would also have a control maybe here of the d5 square. So that's why I'm not a fan of Alpin systems, because I like to place my knights more in a more natural way, but of course this is a system that you can use sometimes in order to beat the Sicilian. So here in the continuation, Daniil Dubov plays now the move g6, develops the dark bishop to c2, preparing again the move d4. Here we have e5, but Daniil Dubov, he wants now to have this central control of the d4 square, because if you lose the battle around the square d4, then white could have very comfortable games. So although in long terms this setup e5 d6 c5 is not so good, because in one particular moment you could lose the battle around the square d5. White could maybe cement one of his knights, maybe even a bishop around the square d5. If that happens, then white would have a great centralization around one particular square. But that's exactly what white cannot do immediately, because as we said, you would love to have your knight on c3 and then to play knight to d5. So far you have to search for different paths in order to maybe somehow occupy the d5 square. So here in the continuation, castling played by Duda, we have bishop to g7 by Dubov, we have d4. So you see Jan-Krzysztof Duda is opening now the center immediately, and here Dubov takes e takes d4, we have c takes d4 and c takes d4, knight to d4, and we're stopping now a little bit and we're evaluating now the position. It's obvious that black has here the d6 weakness. This is now a weak pawn and it's a clear target here of white, so white will simply continue the pressure around the square d6, and that's what I really liked about this game. Many of us would really be annoyed about this position. I think when we would play maybe the game from black's perspective, many of us would, I think, try to desperately to defend this d6 pawn, but not a great tactician like Daniil Dubov. He was realizing, okay, maybe I will lose the pawn, but if I lose the pawn, at least I'm doing that in a good fashion, in a good way. At least I'm developing my minor pieces. At least I can get maybe a huge activity because my opponent will probably try to attack the d6 pawn. And that's the beauty of this game. Here Daniil Dubov will simply leave the protection of the d6 square. So here in the continuation castling we have knight to c3, knight to c6, normal development. Now comes this normal idea, knight to b5, and there is not a good way, I think, to defend this pawn. If you try knight to e8, then I think it's simply too bad. We can simply continue the pressure, bishop to f4, queen to d2, rook to d1. So the pieces, of course, you don't want to have on your back rank. So this move, knight to e8, would be simply a passive move, and it's simply not the style of Daniil Dubov. Daniil Dubov simply left the pawn hanging and played now very active chess. He played now a beautiful move, bishop to g4. The problem about the move bishop to g4 is if you try f3, that was sort of a provocative move by Daniil Dubov, then you get queen to b6, and now after king to h1 we can retreat here now to e6, and the problem is now there is not a good way how to take the pawn on d6. So the d6 pawn is simply hanging here, but the problem is you cannot take it. Here after queen to d6 you get this one, bishop to c4, double attack against the rook and the knight, and you lose probably one of these pieces. Even if you take with the knight here, knight to d6, then you get simply here pinned by the rook, maybe rook from a to d8 or rook from f to d8, it doesn't matter. Here the problem is now the knight will be probably taken, and white has really a bad game here. So that's why you see how this d6 is basically now the main theme of this very cool game. And after knight to b5, as said, bishop to g4, very important move to provoke maybe some kind of a weakness. And here Duda realized that he doesn't want to play the move f3, he doesn't want to weaken his king here. He tried now queen to d2, and again this move queen to d2, okay, it's a different idea. You didn't create any weaknesses, but now we have a lack of development of the dark square bishop. So the queen has taken now here the natural square maybe for the bishop. The queen has covered the bishop, and that's now the main issue. This bad bishop on c1 will become now the main attacking strategy here for Daniil Dubov. After move queen to d2, we have now a6, kicking away the knight. Knight takes d6. Okay, you have your fun, you grab your pawn, but now I'm getting a huge activity. Look at this setup now by Daniil Dubov. As we said in the beginning, the knight on c3 should be there. So you see from black's perspective, the knight on c6 is on a natural square, the knight on f6 on a natural square, bishop on this diagonal, very powerful. This bishop very powerful on g4, queen on e7 attacking at least. Open files are possible with rook to d8, rook to c8. So the setup that black is gaining because of the loss of the pawn, I think it's a great compensation. So that's why here the engine gives equal chances for both sides. If we watch now white's position, again I'm pointing out this bishop on c1 is simply a too bad piece. So here the continuation, knight to c4, played by Jan-Krzysztof Duda. He wanted to finally regroup. He didn't want to have his knight a little bit loose on the board. Here in the continuation, Duda tried, of course, rook to d8, kicking with the queen, and now queen to e1. And there is one rule in chess which I miss many times. I'm telling you about rules, but I make the same mistakes. Here sometimes in chess, when you get attacked like this, rook to d8, then the problem is to retreat, where to retreat. And if you have maybe many opportunities where to retreat with your piece, choose, at least try to choose the square that's more active than this other square, because there are not two choices, I think. Queen to e1, or you can try queen to f4, and queen to f4 would be much better, I think, here for white, because at least you're getting your queen active. At least the queen is playing a very important attacking role. Now if I remove queen to e1, the problem is now again you play the passive move, and look at this, the queen is on the starting rank, the bishop is on the starting rank, the rooks haven't played so far. Still this knight is a little bit loose on the board. Here b5 b4 can come, and also then when we maybe attack the knight on c3, then the e4 pawn is hanging. So again, as I said, it seems to me that Duda was a little bit too passive, slightly too passive here in the continuation of the game. Queen to f4, maybe at least you're trying to attack, also at least you're trying to counter attack. So here in the continuation, knight to d4. So here Dubov is taking over. Really great centralization of the knight. Knight to e3, And now comes this idea b5 with normal idea, of course, b4, and then somehow maybe continue the pressure around the square e4. Still taking over here on e4 would be also risky, because maybe a tactic could work on f3, but as a long-term plan, at least this is a threat. This threat can be maybe through the whole game. Maybe you cannot even realize this threat. You can even you cannot even take the pawn, but at least we're threatening something. That's the beauty of attacking chess. You're at least making your opponent sweat. You're at least trying him to be on the defensive side. So that's why here b5, again, a beautiful attacking move by Dubov. So we have now this idea: f3, bishop to e6, bishop to d1, getting the control of the e2 square, because what Duda wanted to probably do is maybe to liberate, find his queen somewhere, queen to g3, queen to h4, and then if b4 happens, then he wants to have a control of this square, especially of the square e2, because if you move the knight, then the knight could come here on e2. So that's why this bishop on d1 is protecting this very, very important e2 square. So here in continuation, rook from f to d8. Again, you see how Dubov is placing his rooks on this both active files. We have now king to h1, and now queen to b7, knight to e2. Duda doesn't want to tolerate now the knight anymore in the center of the board. We have knight to d7. Again, Dubov plays a very important attacking principle in chess, which says if you take, it's a mistake. So that's why here you can, of course, take out the knight on d4. The knights will be traded, but meanwhile, at least we can do something. A mistake would have been if, for instance, here Dubov would have taken the knight, then after bishop to e2, you see finally the light square bishop gets developed, and I think this is now a decent position again here for white. So that's why, again, a beautiful move here by Duda. He's saying if you want to take the knight on d4, at least I'm getting even my bishop active. So that's why you have to be, I think, familiar with this rule. To take is a mistake. It's really a beautiful rhyme. So here, after in the continuation, finally knight to d4, bishop to d4, bishop to e2, and now bishop to g7, a4. Here Duda doesn't want to tolerate, again, also the space advantage that black has here on the queen side, although it's really wild. Although white is here up a pawn, but the activity of white's pieces gives here already 0.5 evaluation for black. So black was on the better side for most of the time of the game. So here after move a4, Jan-Krzysztof Duda wanted to finally get rid of this space advantage on the queen side, but now after b takes a4, rook to a4, the rook gets a little bit exposed, and it becomes now the main tactical problem here of whites. There is also one rule in chess: the rook connection is very important in chess, especially in open games, and I think we can agree this is an open game as much as it can get, because here the position is really wild. So that's why you have to keep your pieces glued together. And when we watch now black's compensation here for the pawn, I think this great control, the great protection of the pieces is, I think, a great compensation. Here the rook on a4 is already a loose piece, so that's why here knight to c5, it becomes an object of the attack. We have rook to b4, and now queen to c7, but we have to notice again, this rook is really bad here. It can be endangered further in the continuation of the game. So we have bishop to d2, we have knight to b3, we have bishop to c3, and now here Dubov takes bishop takes c3, although probably a better idea here simply to attack the rook, because the rook was simply too bad here. And the problem is now, if you take rook takes b3, of course you lose the piece. Then maybe bishop to a5 can happen, but now for queen to c5 you can maybe take out the rook. But after rook to d8, here the problem is that white doesn't have any more the bishop here. This is a weak pawn here on b2, and I think the dark square problems in the continuation of the game could also cause many problems here for black. But okay, here Dubov took rook, bishop takes c3, we have b takes c3, and now knight to d2. Again, this idea a5 is, I think, perfectly fine. If you try rook to b3, bishop to b3, even if you try here rook to a4, then queen to d4, a centralizing move is, I think, again, a great idea. The dark square problems, again, that the white is here, I think we have to agree, are really obvious. That's why here you have to protect maybe with queen to f2, but now with queen to c3, from this point on, black would have again a comfortable game. But after move knight to d2, Duda plays now a huge mistake. He retreated with the rook, although the best way here for white, it's really wild move. It's the move knight to d5. Knight to d5 is the only way to at least prolong the game somehow, because after potential bishop to d5, here queen to d2 can be played, of course, and now after bishop to e4, maybe rook to d4, then bishop to b7, and now from this point on, I think black is slightly better because of the distant pass pawn. If many pieces are traded off, if the rooks are off the board, if the bishops are off the board, even if the queens are off the board, then the distant pass pawn would probably win the potential endgame, because white king always has to march here towards the queen side in order to stop this progress of the black's pawn. Now in the meanwhile, black's king will go here, and then black's king is simply closer to this pawn, and in the potential, as I said, endgame, black would be slightly better. But unfortunately for Duda, he retreated to g1, which was now a huge mistake, because after queen to c3 the game was over, because as we said in the beginning, the connection between the pieces is the most important thing in open games. Now after move queen to c3, you see the knight on e3 is hanging and the rook on b4 is hanging. So in this particular position, Jan-Krzysztof Duda resigned, so which meant that Daniil Dubov took the lead in this very prestigious tournament. And in the round 19, again Dubov played against the direct rival for the first place, against Maxim Vachill-Graf, and get a draw, which was, I think, a very important moment also in the tournament, because if Dubov would have lost the game against Lagrave, then Maxim Vachill-Graf would be on the first place. So now Daniil Dubov has really great chances. Still two more games are there to be played, but in my opinion, this is now huge chance for the Russian grandmaster to become the world champion in Blitz chess. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Alpine Sicilian. If you want to see our coverage so far, check out my previous analysis on some games, great games by Magnus Carlsen, Alireza Firuja, Levan Ronian, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.